having fun, and there's no kind of pressure. Like, no one else ever needs to see these pages. Today I'm going to fill up a page of my art journal and use my little plants, little plants as inspiration. So yeah, loose watercolours I think, might use a brush pen and yeah, come have some fun. Okay, I'm gonna fill this page up with leaves I think. I'm gonna play around with my trusty watercolour paints. What would happen if I start adding in some purple as a way to kind of create some depth or shade potentially? I know it's very wet at the moment, so what happens when you're doing wet on wet like this with watercolour is there's a lot less control and it kind of bleeds into each other, which can be very frustrating if you're trying to get a certain, you know, effect that you want. But it can also be a really lovely way to have unexpected surprises happen. It can also, it creates this great texture that you can't really get with a lot of other mediums. So that's a real fun thing too. As the purple has dried, you can see that the bits that I didn't like mix in too much still retain their purple when they bleed out to the greens, which is something I really like about this kind of wet on wet technique. And then here, this part where I kind of mix it a bit more, it makes it more of like a brown or a darker colour, which can be really lovely if that's what you're going for. Now I'm using quite a little brush here just because I wanted to play around with what the lines look like. I'm wondering whether I will go in and add a thicker brush, but I actually think I quite like that. I'm going for loose and more inspired by the plant as opposed to a photorealistic kind of representation of it. Kind of a chance just to be present and see what happens and what happy accidents happen. And the great thing about something like an art journal is that everything doesn't need to be great. And you can have a page that overall doesn't really work, but maybe you've learnt something that you really like, or an effect that kind of makes you very happy, or you would like to explore more, and that might just be one like small little piece of it. Paying attention to what's actually in front of you, not only does it quieten your mind, but it helps you see things clearer, because often we think, you know, like if someone says draw a flower, when you go to draw it, you often draw a circle and a couple of ovals, and you end up with something that's recognizable as a flower, but it doesn't look like a real flower, if you know what I mean. And what artists do, and what something like an art journal or sketching from photos or from real life does, is it forces you to look at what's actually in front of you and the shapes that are there, the way the light actually hits it. And sometimes you don't see it in the moment. Like sometimes you're looking back at a finished piece and trying to figure out why does it not sit the way you want it to sit, or you've kind of drawn what you thought something was, as opposed to what actually is there, which is, you know, very, very common. We all it will do that really. I like sometimes using a much smaller brush than like I would typically do, especially if I'm trying to kind of be loose and free. And you'll notice I'm kind of holding quite far down the brush, the paintbrush, and that is because it kind of loosens it up, and it creates these different lines that you wouldn't really get otherwise, which is quite a fun thing, frankly. But yeah, it does mean that it's like less accurate. Okay, now this is all mainly dry. I need to decide, do I want to use the brush pen to define it, or do I want to draw on the white dots first? Yeah, so trying not to kind of worry too much if it's a bit different to how the actual plant looks, because I want it to be kind of different. I want it to be yeah, inspired by, as opposed to exactly like. So sometimes it's useful just to pick out like one or two details that kind of articulate that part of the plant, or that, like what you're drawing. So yeah, rather than doing it exactly, I can already feel that I am starting to get tighter again with my drawing. So I might just do a few little details. Yeah, okay, that kind of works. But also knowing that I'm going to be going back in with the white pen in a little bit means that I can kind of be a bit looser. So now if there's bits that I kind of think don't work or that need like a little bit more, then I can do a little bit more then, is the idea. So yeah. Okay, so that is all the dots done and the lines done. I'm actually quite happy. I mean, the dots can always be sometimes feel a little tedious, but it is those like details that kind of bring it together. I did run into a bit of trouble, which is kind of to be expected with my paint pens. So I ran out, and then I used an old one that I had in my cupboard. And so it spilled a little bit there, but I think, look, it's fine. It's a journal page, and it's about being loose and experimenting, and not it having to be perfect is the goal. So yeah, I'm just going to draw like a little kind of pot-ish thing here, which is, you know, maybe I'll add in a little bit of stalks there. Yeah, I'm glad I stayed loose throughout it. And actually, some of my favourite bits are the bits where I added the purple, even the bits that I mixed in quite a lot and kind of went a kind of brown grey, which when it was still wet didn't look like how I wanted it to look. But actually here I am pretty happy with how that looks now, I think. And yeah, I'm just going to draw a few little lines in, again just trying to keep kind of loose with it. And I often will write down what I did, so that later on, if I'm looking through my pages and I'm like, oh, I really like that, how did that happen? Then I can remember it was watercolours with brush pens and paint pens to do the dots. And I used wet on wet technique, so I'm just going to write that in now. Now I've walked away for a second and then come back to it, I've just realised that actually I just want to add just a quick little spot of colour on this page just by adding just a very loose wash of watercolour. So yeah, so there's my loose, more inspired by my little plant than exactly. Yeah, it's fun to try something a bit more loose and experimental in your art journal. And that's what it's there for. And to note down what you really like about it as well.